Hi, my name is Harley Green, and this is how you make a histogram in Desmos, and this is also how I would teach to make a histogram in Desmos, because this is this is just how I would teach it. So the first thing, sorry, I had to clarify Desmos. The first thing that I would do is have an anchor chart on my board that kind of gave my students step by step, but we would fill it out as we go. So also our data is one of the first things that we would talk about, and we would talk about that this data is a set of 40 scores out of 100, and that it is a group of students' test scores out of 100. Obviously, you would not use real number test scores in your classroom, so I did not use real number test scores that I had. I just have 40 numbers from an arranged amount of numbers from 58 to 97 as my data. So step one, I would tell my students, would be to go to Desmos and open the graphing calculator. So the first thing that we would do would be to open our computers and find Desmos, and then we would open it. And we should get a page that looks like this and is blank. And then I would tell them in that first box is where we're going to start the next part of our problem. So the next part of our problem would be to type in your data. And I would obviously write the numbers on a piece of paper like I have here, and I would tell them to type your data like this and use these numbers. So I would make sure that everybody knows that you're supposed to put A equals or whatever your letter would be, and put brackets, and in between each number there is a comma, and then put a bracket at the end of your set of numbers. And then after I did that, I would have mine pulled up to where they could see that this is what it should look like, and it should tell you that there are 40 elements in the list of numbers. After that, I would explain to them that in another box, so box number 2, that is right under your list of elements, is where you would type your command. So our command today is going to be histogram A and then 7. So then I would obviously write that on our paper where we could see it and we could go back, because this is a place that I struggled with. So I feel like it would be a place that my students would struggle with, because I capitalized the H. And I would make sure that they know that you are not supposed to capitalize the H, or it will not work. So after that, I would show them mine and make sure that theirs looks like mine does. And then after that, making sure everybody has all of this part correct, we would go in and we would talk about moving the bar height to density and the bin alignment to excuse me, left. So then we would zoom out where you would be able to see our data. Our data is somewhere right there. And then we can obviously play with the different little settings to be able to see different things about our bar heights and things. So there are our bars. So after we had talked about that, we would look at our histogram and we would talk about the shape of our histogram, because this is something that I would do with them prior to putting the histogram in Desmos, because I feel like the shape would be something easy for them to recall if it was something that we had already talked about, and it would not be too overwhelming trying to learn all the different shapes and trying to learn how to put it in Desmos and some other things that we would talk about during the lesson. So as a class, we would kind of write our response to what our shape was. So our response would be, we can see that this histogram is roughly symmetrical. There's a taller point in the middle, they're mostly even on all planes. And the bars are almost the same height on both sides. This means that the data is spread evenly around the center. So that tells us that our data is pretty even, and that our histogram is symmetrical. So then after we finished this part and everybody has their histogram and they can see their histogram, we would then move into the center of the spread and the range. So the first thing we would talk about would be our range, and we would be able to see that the center point of this data looks to be around 75 to 85 because this is where most of the bars are the highest. So we would be able to look at our histogram and see where the bars are kind of the highest and go from there to find our range. And then we would talk about our spread, and we would obviously do kind of like a definition that the spread shows us how far the scores go. So, and then we would look and I would tell them that, okay, so we gotta start with our lowest score, so let's find our lowest score. And our lowest score would be 58. And then we would go in and find our highest score, and our highest score would be 97. So that would mean we hit the lowest score is 58 and the highest score is 97. And so our spread would be 58 to 97. And then we would talk about our range, and we would kind of not define it, but just a little bit tell us how we get our answer. So the range is your lowest score minus your highest score. So that would be our 97 minus 58, giving us 39. So that makes our range 39. And then after that, we would kind of go back through and review if any students had any questions that, or if there were any parts that were confusing to them that may trip them up, or areas where they struggled and had to refer back to our histogram sheet telling us what step I have to do next, how I have to do it, like referring back to the different steps if there was a step they couldn't figure out, or if there was a step that just kind of stumped them that they did not understand. So that is how I would teach histograms and Desmos, and thank you so much.